days are cooler, nights are warmer, and I put the blame on you. Time moves slow, but my heart beats faster. When these eyes are looking right at you, right at you. You give me something to believe in, just what I needed. You're the closest.
We have, in the interest of our own success and getting more viewers, decided to curate sometimes in ways that get people riled up and get people thinking a particular way. And the thing that it's cost us is some critical thinking. It's not just an American problem. I see it everywhere in the world, that people choose now. They have access to all sorts of good information in America. You can choose to watch what you want or listen to what you want, but we have chosen to go to those places that make us just feel better about who we are. And so we're driving those wedges. The things that I complain about colonialism and racism and apartheid, it's the same mechanism. Right? It's the same mechanism that we use. We cater to people's fears and insecurities. And so I try and address the idea that in doing that, in not being critical thinkers, you have to not be a victim of your media. You have to not be one of these people who consumes one thing. You have to triangulate your news. You have to look around and say, is this story being reported this way elsewhere? Now, that's a heavy lift for a regular person, right?
I was going to say, it's too much work.
But if I told you that your water was dirty, and you have to boil it or you have to drink bottled water, you wouldn't take a few days to think about that. You'd do that immediately.
Right.
Well, if your news is dirty, you have to do the same thing. I agree. It shouldn't be on our listeners and our viewers and our readers to have to do that. But at the moment, until we solve our output problem, you, the consumer of news, have to work on your input problem.
Okay.
And I agree. It's not fair, but that's the only way you're going to get real information today.
Before break, we talked about racism versus capitalism, and let me just admit that's a trick question. So it's actually either or.
No, but it's an important one to ask.
Okay.
And I like this because you always you always sort of push these things so that we actually provide an answer.
Can I just confess something? You know, I would absolutely love to never talk about race. Uh-huh. But it dawned on me when I first started on SiriusXM. It'll be 10 years ago. I was doing this thing on the heels of Mike Brown and Eric Garner, and it just was like Charleston. I said, white is a problem. I didn't realize it until one day I was like, I just want to hear from white people. Just call up. And we're on Urban View. And the lines lit up. And I said, there's a lot of white people listening to the show. Oh, my goodness. Okay. So how do we fix this? And then it became clear to me, and it happened on the show, that this notion of whiteness, because there's just like we were talking about, somebody's taking something away from me. When you hear the replacement theory, and at the time it was like, in 2048, it's going to be majority minority. Right. And I was like, this language is weird. Yeah. What does this even mean? Yeah. And what does it mean to be white? So when people call up, as a white man as a white woman, I always ask this question as a parlor trick, because very few people can answer it. What does it mean to be white? Right. So getting into racism versus capitalism is a trick question, because you can't have a conversation about either without dealing with both at the same time.
That's right. That's exactly right.
So how do you sit with racism, man, that most people don't even know what the hell you are? When they look at you, what are you, Ali?
You know, interestingly enough, I started my career as a business reporter, right?
Yes.
So I say it often. I'm a capitalist. I'm pro-capitalism. And I can acknowledge,
what
first of all...
What does that mean,
Well, as far as economic systems go, a system that causes people to have incentives to do better is better than the alternatives, right? All the systems that don't provide incentives result in people saying, why do I provide the extra output if I'm not going to earn more, get a promotion, do better, start a business, take a remarkable risk, invest in someone else? So
do you think basic income... Universal basic income,
yes,
which
I think it's a great idea.
Okay, because I think everyone should have a base.
But universal basic income, for instance, if salary should be, I'm making it up, $75,000 a year. Generally speaking, we're not talking about providing people with $75,000 a year. We're talking about providing them with $15,000 or $20,000. The amount at which you can cover some basic expenses, and then you can decide you want to be a poet or a hairdresser or a computer programmer. Like, you can make the decision about where you go from there. Not worrying about food
and clothing and housing
and healthcare, right? We can solve healthcare, by the way, without universal basic income, but we just don't, right? Every other developed country in the world world does, we don't. We have higher maternal mortality than any other developed country in the world, higher infant mortality than any other developed country in the world. That is tied to both healthcare and abortion questions, but that's a different topic. My point is, you want the obvious problems with capitalism? Right now, the average CEO earns 190 times what the average worker earns. There's just something messed up about that. And let's talk about capitalism and racism. Shortly after America gained its independence, it overtook the United Kingdom, its parent, in terms of GDP growth. It was a bigger, it became a bigger country.
Yes.
And everybody talks about that as an element of American entrepreneurship and all that kind of stuff. It was free labor. It was free labor. And then after the end of slavery, it was 50 years of basically free labor, right? It was free labor. And then somehow for the enslaved person who was free, they ended each year with exactly the same thing they did when they were enslaved for a long time.
And sharecropping.
Right,
and
sharecropping was a
factories and
right. It was like negative business. It was the opposite of that's not capitalism. That's exploitation.
We never talk about that.
Yes.
You know what's really evil about the period of Reconstruction besides giving the South reparations? Giving the South reparations for the loss of labor.
Right.
Besides that.
So that should tell you everything you need to know, right?
Besides that, right?
Yeah.
Also this kind of notion that you know, while people were being elected to Congress to represent themselves, then came the terror around Birth of a Nation and the rise of the Klan. And very few people talk about that. But that gave rise to South Africa. That gave rise to Hitler. That gave the Jim Crow, black codes, and all of those laws were codified in such a way into law that it was like, this is how we do this, and continue the enslavement. And we've
continued this to this day, because what happened is, so after slavery, it seemed a little harder to get absolutely free labor, but you could still largely do it about 50 years, until industrialization caused there to be other options for people, and those were exploitive too, but in the end it caused sort of a breakout of the system. And black people in America have never been able to make up for that, the wealth effect.
Can we sit there for a second? Because what's really insidious, right? And during enslavement, you had to feed and clothe and take care of your property, just the way you would a farm animal, because you want them to continue to the labor, or you have to replace them. But then when they couldn't bring folk from Africa, then they, massively raped. You know, shout out to South Carolina, Virginia, these breeding states, right? So you can repopulate. But then when there's no slavery, you don't have to you don't have to clothe or feed these people. So
everybody pays for themselves.
But then you create laws for loitering. So if you don't have a job on a plantation to do more work, that I don't have to clothe or feed you anymore, I think in many ways that's more insidious.
Well, you talk about how it gave rise to apartheid. That's exactly what apartheid laws were, right? You had to have a pass and permission to go everywhere, and as long as you didn't, they arrested you, and your fine was much more money than you would ever make. And the alternative to the fine, in my grandfather's day, it used to be 30 days in jail. So they were, passive resistors, so they took the jail time. It was fine. What it became was basically chain gangs. You went and worked on somebody's farm. It was farm labor.
Right.
So you got arrested for doing nothing, and you became farm labor.
Right.
So we've perpetuated this. So today we don't have that, but what we have is the idea that we will outsource, rather than pay people properly for their work, we will now outsource this to the places in the world that will do it for the least. The legacy of slavery and then Jim Crow and sharecropping, all of that has persisted to this day. So I will never make the argument that capitalism is not an unfair system. I'm making the argument it is still better than the other options, but needs to continue to be reformed. And one of those things is to make sure everybody's got health care, to make sure people can unionize and collectively bargain for their rights, and to make up for the inequalities, to make up for the injustices, including things like universal basic income. But your idea, right, the idea that we paid reparations for enslaving people, for the loss of assets because you lost the right to enslave people, is wild.
And no one talks about it, right?
It's wild.
We don't talk about the Chinese Exclusion Acts and all of the ways in which this country built its rail system that we love. I love Amtrak. Shout out to Amtrak.
But that's exactly right. That's what happened.
But put people in the ghettos.
Yep.
Just, racism versus capitalism. Can you have capitalism without racism?
I believe you can.
Can
and
you?
It's a good debate, and I think it's one I'd love in a normal policy environment where we weren't talking about the end of democracy. We would have that. I would love to see or moderate debates where we can say, what does capitalism without racism look like? I don't want to be Pollyanna-ish and say, yes, absolutely, but I do think that there is a way, because what we've learned from smartphones is that all around the world, now that everybody has access to great information, you're finding brilliance everywhere. You're finding brilliance in all corners of the world because people can be smart with access to, digital knowledge.
My days are cooler, nights are warmer, and I put the blame on you. Time moves slow, but my heart beats faster. When these eyes are looking right at you, you give me something to believe in, just what I needed. You're the closest.